The first shot wasn't meant to be fired by her. It was meant to kill her. The crack echoed off the canyon walls like the sky splitting open, and the dust at Mara Kincaid's feet jumped as if the earth itself flinched. She froze mid-step, camera dangling from her neck, heart slamming so hard she thought it might be louder than the gunfire. Around her, the patrol scattered, boots scraping rock, voices shouting warnings she could barely hear over the roar in her ears. In that instant, Mara understood a truth no press briefing had ever prepared her for. War did not care why you were there. It only cared that you were. Mara had come as a war reporter, nothing more. She had traded a quiet newsroom and a predictable life for flak jackets and frontlines because she believed stories could change things. She believed if people could see the cost of war, the fear in a soldier's eyes, the exhaustion in their hands, the way hope clung on by a thread, then maybe something human could survive the politics. She wasn't here to fight. She was here to witness. The ambush came just after dawn, when the light was soft and deceptive. The unit she'd embedded with had been moving through a narrow pass, the kind that felt ancient and watchful, when the first explosion ripped through the rear vehicle. The blast threw Mara forward, knocking the breath from her lungs. The air filled with smoke and screaming metal. Training took over for the soldiers, but Mara had no training for this. She crawled behind a boulder, hands shaking so badly she could barely keep hold of her camera. She watched as the squad leader, Captain Elias Monroe, dragged a wounded soldier into cover. Monroe was the kind of man who spoke softly and moved decisively, the kind who checked on Mara every night to make sure she was holding up. Stay close, he'd told her. And stay alive. Now he was bleeding from a gash on his forehead, still shouting orders, still putting himself between danger and his people. The enemy was dug in high above them, hidden among rocks and scrub. Every attempt to move was answered with precise fire. The pass had become a trap. Mara pressed her back to the stone and tried to slow her breathing. She thought of home. She thought of the articles she hadn't written yet. She thought, absurdly, that her mother would be furious if she died without calling more often. Then Monroe slid in beside her, eyes sharp despite the chaos. "We're pinned," he said. "We need eyes on that ridge." He glanced at her camera. "You see anything?" Mara lifted the lens, hands steadier now that she had something to do. Through the viewfinder, the world narrowed. She saw movement where there shouldn't be any. A glint of metal, a silhouette that didn't belong to the mountain. "There," she said, pointing. "Upper left." There staggered, at least a dozen. Monroe followed her gaze. For a moment, something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe, or calculation. "You've got good eyes," he said. "Did you ever shoot?" Mara hesitated. She hadn't planned on this story being told, not like this. "Once," she said quietly. "Before journalism, I grew up hunting with my father." She didn't add that she'd been good, or that she'd stopped because she hated the way people looked at her when she was better than them. Another burst of fire snapped overhead, showering them with dust. A soldier cried out. Monroe swore under his breath. He looked at Mara again, weighing an impossible decision. "We're running out of options," he said. "If I can get you a rifle, can you cover us long enough to move the wounded?" Mara's mouth went dry. She wasn't supposed to carry a weapon. She wasn't supposed to cross that line. But she looked at the blood on Monroe's sleeve, at the fear in the eyes of a 19-year-old soldier. Clutching his leg, at the narrow strip of sky that suddenly felt very far away. The line seemed small compared to the distance between life and death. "Yes," she said. Her voice surprised her with its steadiness. "I can." They moved fast. A rifle was pressed into her hands, heavier than she remembered, familiar in a way that stirred old muscle memory. She crawled to a vantage point behind a jagged outcrop, heart pounding, mind racing. Monroe shouted orders, drawing fire away as best he could. Mara settled in, pressed her cheek to the stock, and breathed. The first shot felt like falling. It wasn't fear that guided her finger, it was focus. The target dropped from view, and a terrible silence followed, broken only by the echo fading into the mountains. Mara swallowed hard, forcing herself not to think about what she'd done. There was no time. The enemy returned fire, and she shifted position, remembering her father's voice, calm and patient, teaching her to read the wind. She fired again, and again. Each shot was a decision, heavy and irreversible. With every pull of the trigger, Mara felt something inside her fracture and harden at the same time. She wasn't counting at first. She was watching patterns, anticipating movement, buying seconds where seconds meant lives. Below her, the soldiers moved the wounded. Monroe signaled with a raised fist. Keep going. By the 6th shot, her shoulder ached. By the 8th, her vision tunneled. By the 10th, the ridge had gone eerily quiet. The 11th shot was different. It was the last visible threat, a figure hesitating at the edge of retreat. Mara held her breath, steadying herself against the tremor in her hands, and fired. Silence fell like a held breath finally released. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Monroe's voice crackled over the radio, tight with disbelief. "Cease fire," he said. "We're clear." Mara slumped back against the rock, the rifle slipping from her grasp. Her hands were slick with sweat. Her stomach churned. She wanted to cry, to scream, to throw the weapon as far away as she could. Instead, she sat there, staring at the mountains that had almost swallowed them whole. They evacuated the pass under the cover of smoke, carrying their wounded, leaving behind the wreckage of the morning. No one spoke much on the way back. When they reached safety, Monroe found Mara sitting alone, helmet off, eyes distant. "You saved lives today," he said gently. Mara looked up at him, tears finally spilling over. "I ended them too." Monroe didn't argue. He sat beside her, the space between them heavy with shared understanding. "Both things can be true," he said. "And neither is easy to live with." The story broke before they even left the country. A war reporter forced into combat. 11 perfect shots. The headlines were loud and sharp, hungry for heroism or controversy, depending on who was writing. Mara gave one interview and then refused the rest. She couldn't stand the way people wanted to make it simple. When she finally went home, the silence was harder than the gunfire. She struggled to sleep. She avoided crowds. She questioned everything she thought she believed. For a while, she considered never writing again. But stories have a way of insisting. Months later, Mara returned to her notes, her recordings, her memories. She didn't write about herself at first. She wrote about Monroe, about the young soldier who sent her a letter saying he was learning to walk again, about the medic who kept joking even as he stitched wounds with shaking hands. She wrote about fear and courage living side by side. She wrote about the cost of being there, and the cost of looking away. When she finally told her own part of the story, she didn't glorify it. She didn't hide from it either. She wrote the truth as best she could. That sometimes, the role you choose is taken from you, and what matters is not the label you wore, but the humanity you carried into the moment. The article ended with a line her father once told her, long before war and headlines and impossible choices. It wasn't about shooting or winning. It was about responsibility. "You don't define yourself by the moment you're forced into," it read. "You define yourself by what you do with the weight of it afterward." The response was quiet at first. Then letters came. From veterans. From journalists. From people who had never been close to war but felt changed by the story. Mara read every one. She had come as a war reporter. She left as something more complicated, something scarred but still standing. And in telling the truth, fully, painfully, she found a way to honor the lives saved, the lives lost, and the fragile, stubborn hope that even in the worst moments, humanity can still choose to act with purpose.